What is going on, everybody, and welcome back inside the lab to Thursday's episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast with Steele and Flip. We're looking back to look ahead, baby. Rewind on the Fantasy Draft 2022, breaking down every single pick from the 6th round all the way down to the 1st, giving you our prognostications and breakdowns for each player. Thank you for joining us. Let's get right to it.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're almost there, everybody. Happy Thursday. Another week almost in the books in the NHL offseason, grinding increasingly closer to puck drop on the 2023 NHL season. But on today's episode, we're going to rewind a little bit, take a look back at the 2022 NHL Fantasy Draft. Steele and I are going to go through our own Listener League Fantasy Hockey Draft going down from the 6th round all the way through to the 1st, each player by player, and we're going to give you everything you need to know about last year's draft so you can dominate next year's. And you see it there. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the players we're going to talk about, and if not, Rasmus Dahlin's going to kick it off, and I don't need to give too much more preamble, Steele, except for letting you know that today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. And also, thank you for making us your first listen every single day, even throughout the summer and off season. Steele, I'm hyped up for this conversation because this is where I'm fully going to learn from my mistakes, and already looking at some of these picks of not only mine, but some of our other GMs, some good ones, some bad ones. And I think what's important here is we're going to break down what we think of the draft position, how they ended up doing this year, and maybe what their season means for where they end up going next season, most importantly. So let's kick it off. 6th round, I'll turn it over to you.
6th round, last person to get drafted in the 6th round was actually Rasmus Dahlin with the 72nd overall pick. What an incredible season the young Swedish defenseman had. 15 goals, 73 points in 78 games, really becoming that blue line essence, the Buffalo Sabres, that superstar blue liner that the Sabres have needed. He's a keeper, dynasty hockey fantasy GM's absolute dream to draft for a defenseman, and just an overall generational player, it seems like, on the blue line as well. He was the 2nd highest fantasy D-man in the league, right behind Erik Karlsson, top 35 in fantasy points just as a player, with all forwards and goalies as well. He plays a very strong, heavy game, and he plays heavy minutes, just under 26 minutes this past year on average, which was a lot for the 23-year-old. That jumped up over 2.5 minutes from the year previous. The peripherals are great, over 200 shots, over 130 blocks, 100 hits. Like I said, he is a fantasy GM's dream, especially in keeper dynasty leagues. I think there's maybe only 4 or 5 defensemen I'd rather take ahead of Rasmus Dahlin right now. That's Cale Makar, Roman Josi, John Carlson, maybe Adam Fox. I think you can throw in Dougie Hamilton and Brandon Montour after the seasons they just had, but Rasmus Dahlin would be right there with Adam Fox as the 4th or 5th defenseman taken off the board for me. So with everything considered, obviously had great seasons. Dahlin could potentially put up 20 goals, 80 points next year. The team looks great. They're young. They're fast. They score a lot of goals. We know that. I think if you get him in the 4th round, you're absolutely lucky, because I think he goes in the 3rd.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you just said, except for maybe John Carlson, only because of that injury. I know he bounced back nicely, and he's been one of the most consistent blue line producers, so I'm not going to take away from him. But after the season Dahlin had, I'm putting him ahead of a few of those guys. But what really impressed me this year with him, Steele, is he ramped up that defensive physicality. He was throwing his body around, 92 penalty minutes as well, Steele. And perhaps most impressively, 132 block shots and 204 shots on net. You mentioned him being a, banger league GM's dream. I think last year he was just any GM's dream, because he really filled out so many of those categories. And I'm with you. He's also got the caliber, the pedigree. 1st overall, he developed a little slowly. 6'3", 202 pounds. There's a couple of guys on here, especially defensemen, we'll talk about, that I love their size. But yeah, he was also plus 12. And I know the plus minus numbers aren't always super reflective of how a guy's season went. But I think given the weakness of the Buffalo Sabres on the back end and the goaltending, plus 12 is also a really impressive number, and I think a really good sign of where his career is headed, Steele. And I'm with you on his value. I think getting him at this round, 6th round in your draft this year ain't going to happen. He's going to be going top 5 rounds for sure.
Yeah, for sure top 5. I think, again, if you get him in the 4th, it's just absolutely lucky. I think he goes as high as the 3rd round. Again, it depends on the league format. I know I'm in a couple of leagues that
we'll say all draft prep long.
Yep, we say that all year long, but I know myself, I'm in a few leagues that have a category 4 defensive points, and a guy who can put up, again, 73 points, potentially over 80 plus this next season. He's one of those hot commodities you want on the blue line.
Yes.
Who may not be a hot commodity, though, who is the player that came in at 71st overall in our draft. 6th round, 71st overall. That's Colton Parayko. And right off the bat, just way too high. Way too high for Colton Parayko. There's just so many other defensemen or other players I'd rather draft ahead of him. I don't even think Parayko is a guy that I would even draft as a potential 6th defenseman or even a bench player for my team. It really depends on the later stages of the draft, but 6th round is just way too high. I was looking
for sure.
In later rounds of our fantasy draft, Drew Doughty, Miro Heiskanen, and Devin Taves all were drafted in the 9th round. The fact that those 3 guys fell down to the 9th round is just incredible. And the fact that Parayko was taken in the 6th is crazy. So his average draft position is 198.7. So that tells you that it was a mistake in our fantasy league.
Yeah.
Because looking around to where he's drafted on average, it's pretty much in the 16th round. Overall, just a very bad pick.
Yeah, no disrespect to banger 4th line bangers. That was just a bit of a head scratcher. Hey, I had a couple of bold picks as well, but just looking at a guy in Parayko who, again, I kind of like him for keeper dynasty at the really end of your draft. If he's around, he brings a lot of value in those kinds of formats because of the banger league style, but that's really the only place that I would ever consider drafting him now because of just that down season last year, minus 19 Steele, speaking of plus minus. But before that, topping out at 35 points, consistent producer for the 30 to 35 point area. Like you mentioned, drafted way, way too high. And at the end of the day, I guess I just wanted to mention his name's actually been out there in offseason rumors. Let me pull it up here. Where is it? Again, Oilers, Jets, Flames, Oilers, and Jackets, all interested in this player. But I think his value on the ice, Steele, is actually going to be much more impactful than on the fantasy scene. Because I think if he goes to a team like the Oilers, he'll have reduced minutes, most likely. He might just have to play that physical role, not be counted on for his offense, which he was a little bit more in St. Louis. So I could actually see him going. Flames might be a good fit for him as well. I'm with you on the fantasy value. I don't even see him being a draftable player in most formats unless it's a deep keeper league. Like I have 16 teams in my league, Steele, so Colton Parayko might even get drafted. But if he goes to the Oilers, I actually like that for their overall success.
Yeah, definitely something they need help on, again, is on the blue line. But sometimes, I would say for the most part, fantasy can be very compared very well to just the generalization of the hockey game. But there's a few players out there that fantasy-wise, it just doesn't compare nicely to. And Colton Parayko is one of them. Again, the peripherals, when you look at the physicality, the blocks and the hits, you get those. But 27 points, consistent 30-point player, only 130 shots, just not a guy. Again, if you're in a very big league with 16 teams, then that's the type of guy you might have to drive towards the later stages. After the break, though, we are going to be talking about Kevin Fiala, Quinn Hughes, and then, of course, later in the episode, we've got Nick Suzuki and Filip Forsberg to round out Thursday's episode. But Flip, of course, today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time.
Brought to you by our friends at Game Time. You're going to want to be downloading the Game Time app, but you're also going to want to be checking out the rest of our countdown of the Fantasy Draft Rewind 2022. We'll be breaking it down over the next week, piece by piece, player by player, so you can dominate next season. But like I said, you got to be checking out Game Time. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Buying tickets for your favorite events should never be stressful. And with the Game Time app, it's fast and easy to buy tickets for all of your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets, the best price guarantee with Game Time, you can stop stressing over tickets and get hyped for all the fun you should be having. Don't forget planning months in advance. You don't need that. Game Time has ticket deals all the way up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. With the Game Time guarantee, you always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time credits you for 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account today, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account, redeem a code, LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. We are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you can find your favorite team from all 4 major sports leagues, including the NCAA, your team every single day. And thank you so much for tuning in to the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast with Flip Livingstone and your boy Steele Roden. We appreciate all the support. Make sure you hit the subscribe, hit the follow button, follow us on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform. Episodes drop Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. And let's continue on this ride of the Fantasy Hockey Rewind from last year's fantasy draft. Kevin Fiala up next, 70th overall in the 6th round. I know you're high on the LA Kings, a few of the LA Kings players, Fiala being one of them. So I'll throw it over to you because I'm really interested to see where you think a guy like Fiala should fall and be drafted at after a very impressive season.
Yeah, impressive season, 72 points. He was a little bit banged up, only played 69 games, missed out on the full 82. I think he's one of those guys, Steele, that he's just kind of sneaky good is how I describe Kevin Fiala. A little bit of a miniature dude, but very good skater, soft hands, good vision. Really, really like Kevin Fiala's game. And what I like the most is at times he plays a little bit chippy. He gets penalty minutes, 52 penalty minutes as well. Ice time up. You know I love that ice time number. And at the end of it all, the mix in LA is starting to get better and better up front, and just a very balanced attack. And maybe the whole way you can describe LA's group, sneaky good as well. Adrian Kempe, Victor Arvidsson, Trevor Moore, Philip Deneau, Hans Kopitar, all going about their business very quietly, like their captain. Move in silence. You know, bad boys move in silence, Steele. And Kevin Fiala got it done last year, really fluctuating throughout the lineup. And that's what I wanted to say. In certain leagues, he's got dual eligibility because he shifts around a little bit. And for the most part, left winger, of course. But I really, really like Kevin Fiala's game. And I think next year, if he can stay healthy, and that's what I'm going to count on by saying, I think you got to draft him a little bit higher. Because I think another year of this group together in LA, Steele, is also going to produce better results. Big question mark in the cage, but if I were to say, so he's drafted at the end of the 6th round, I think he's got to go end of the 4th round, 5th round. He shouldn't be going later than that because I see 80 points, 85 points from him this season.
I couldn't agree more with you. First thing on my notes here is Fiala will be drafted in the 5th round of next year's fantasy draft. Looking at his ADP, he had an ADP of 63.7, which is exactly the 6th round this past year. So it's pretty accurate so far. But again, you look at what you just said. He only played 69 games. He missed 13 games this past year and still had 72 points, which was second best on the LA Kings roster, right behind Anze Kopitar. So if he can play a full 82 or get to a full 82, you never know, 85, maybe even 90 with all that talent they have in the top 6 group.
Why not?
Looking at Kevin Fiala right now, though, he's 27 years old in July. He had a breakout season in Minnesota 2 years ago where he had 85 points in 82 games. Followed that up again with the 72 and 69 with the LA Kings. LA looks very dangerous right now. Again, we talked a lot about that Oilers and Kings first round series. We thought that whoever made it out of that first round series between those two teams was going to the Stanley Cup Finals. Obviously, it didn't pan out that way. But the LA Kings are very, very close. They're very, very dangerous right now. And they have a bunch of talented players. Fiala might be the most dangerous of them all.
He also finished the postseason, and I know the Kings bowed out, especially in those last 3 games. but he finished with 6 points in the last 4 games, and he was arguably their best forward. So he's also now got some comfort level in the postseason under his belt that he's proven a couple of times. He's actually got, let me just pull up his postseason numbers because I think they're pretty solid as well, Steele. NHL postseason in 38 games, he's got 22 points in his career. So pretty solid all-around player. And I think he's just, again, because of the markets he's played in as well, Steele, he doesn't just get enough love. And those are some of the players that you can get really sneaky with, just like their talent, and grab them at the right round. Just like this next player. But I think this next player has just got so much talent. I know you're high on him.
Yeah. Quinn Hughes, 69th overall in our fantasy draft last year. Great young defenseman in this league. We got a lot of defensemen in this round, actually. We had Rasmus Dahlin,
that always
Colton
happens,
Parayko,
right?
and Quinn Hughes now. So three defensemen actually at the end of the 6th round. 7 goals, 76 points in 78 games. He's an offensive juggernaut, gets most of his points. I think 50% of Quinn Hughes' points come on the power play. So Vancouver has a really strong power play. It might be a little different without Bo Horvat anymore, but they've got some weapons: Quinn Hughes, Elias Pettersson, JT Miller. Nonetheless, 76 points in 78 games. His average draft position was 51.2, which is pretty much the last pick of the 4th round. To me, I do like this player a lot. I think that's a little bit high for an ADP, the end of the 4th round. He definitely should move up a few spots from where he was drafted in our league. But I think he squeaks into the 5th round. But I think the beginning of the 6th is more accurate for Quinn Hughes. Again, offensive juggernaut, power play juggernaut. But the question mark, or not the question mark, the thing that scares me about Quinn Hughes is the peripheral stats. Only 150 shots, only 71 blocks, 29 hits. They do slightly increase each year. But with a defenseman that is as offensive-minded and as electric as Quinn Hughes, those peripheral stats really do add up at the end of the season. And a guy of his stature needs to be shooting the puck a lot more. I know he's a smaller guy. He's not, a physical game is not, or the physical aspect is not a part of his game, but he needs to at least be shooting over 200 shots. He's the quarterback for them on the power play. He's the guy they look to. He needs to do a lot more.
I wouldn't say potentially do a lot more, because I get that this is his game. So I hear both things that you're saying. At the end of the day, I think really what you're getting at is just be wary of where you take the guys that are a little bit more one-dimensional. And this is not taking away from Quinn Hughes, because also I'll hit you with this take and let me know what you think about it. Oliver Ekman-Larsson's buyout, he's gone. We already know Quinn Hughes was probably going to have to take on more of a lion's share of minutes and really leading this blue line, which he's already done most of his career. But I think even more so. Does that mean good things for his numbers? I don't know. But it's going to be more minutes on Quinn Hughes this year, I think. That might mean good things for his peripherals. I don't know, Steele. But I think right where he was taken is pretty close to where he should. End of the 5th round, 6th round. I think it was pretty accurate for Quinn Hughes, but just a really good season. I'm not going to stand here and say 7 goals, 69 assists. Also, again, plus 15. Those are all pretty solid numbers. You mentioned the peripherals. He's also only 23 years old, and he's finished in the top 15 in Norris voting in 2 of his 5 seasons in the NHL. His first season, he played 5 games. So that's 2 out of 4. That's pretty good. So let's just keep our eye on Mr. Quinn Hughes, because I think, Steele, honestly, one good year with the Canucks this year, I think we might be looking at him a little differently if he can bring that physicality up, which you mentioned.
Well, that's how we're looking at Miro Heiskanen now, and we will get to him later in this offseason. But after the regular season he just had, I'm looking at him in a different light, taking a new step, being that postseason as well, being that guy on the blue line for the Dallas Stars. We are going to get to Nick Suzuki and, of course, Filip Forsberg very, very soon. But we got to talk about one of our favorite sponsors on the podcast. This episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. I can't stress enough how comfy these shorts are. I'm wearing a pair every other day and constantly trying to look and grab some more as soon as possible, because they even make me look better too. Again, didn't think that was possible, but Bird Dogs make me way more attractive when I'm walking down the street in a couple of different pairs of Bird Dogs. They're built for comfort and for versatility. Bird Dogs give you the freedom to wear the pants for any type of occasion, a day on the golf course, a casual date, out with your friends for a couple of drinks, maybe even some physical activities like going for a hike or going to the gym. because the built-in liners are a game changer, and they have huge variety of styles and clothing like khaki shorts, Oxford shorts, bathing suits, joggers, and more khakis. They even use an anti-stink sweat working fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. I can't get enough of the Bird Dogs. So go to birddogs.com/lockedonnhl for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnhl for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take off your Bird Dogs. We promise you that. And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Thank you so much for all the support you show us out there. Keep on DMing us. Keep on leaving some comments on the YouTube channel. Follow and subscribe. We appreciate all the love you show us every single day. And thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Nick Suzuki next on the list of our fantasy draft here in the 6th round of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey League. Drafted 68th overall in the 6th round. Flip, I'll throw it over to you. What are your thoughts on Nick Suzuki and where the Montreal Canadiens as a team stand right now? Because I thought very long and hard about where I think Nick Suzuki should be drafted.
Yeah, this team, when you look at this lineup, Steele, it's not so pretty, is it? The other thing that I think about when I look at this lineup is, other than showing some love for Sam Montembeault, who had a really, really solid season considering how much rubber he saw, and a really good world championship as well overseas for Canada. So shout out Sam Montembeault. Nick Suzuki, I think I wanted to come out and say it was a disappointing season for Nick Suzuki, but I think that's just because I really expected him to take another step. And when I look at the numbers, it's not a bad season. You know, he's 66 points, 26 goals, 40 assists, still very valuable fantasy player. The shots being down are one of my big concerns. Shooting the puck 162 times, this is a player that needs to shoot the puck a lot more, in my opinion, and get his confidence back. Yeah. He's got all the tools to be an 80-point guy, Steele. For sure he does, and all the skill. Very smart player. Great vision. Some of the highest hockey IQ you're going to see. But I think what really hurt him this year, aside from the team being hot garbage, is Caulfield going down. That's his gunner. That's his wingman. He gets at least another 10, 15 points if Caulfield stays healthy down the stretch there. That's number one. And number two, I think you can probably get him right in around this same spot. Maybe he drops a little bit in value, but I wouldn't sleep on him too much, because as much as the Canadiens are bad, which is my other take, they're rebuilding. It's going to take time. So, let's fade them heavy over the next year or two. Suzuki and Caulfield and some of the young guys up front are going to get some looks, and they're going to score some goals. So I think there's still some value with Nick Suzuki.
Yeah, definitely some value with Nick Suzuki, a decent amount, especially at 22, 23 years old right now, the captain of the Montreal Canadiens. This was a tough one for me. I think Nick Suzuki is in a very tough place right now. And again, looking at the ADP, his ADP is 147.5. So he was actually getting drafted in the 13th round. That shows you the comparison and how different it was from his ADP and from our league, where he was drafted in the 6th.
I drafted him, by the way. I'm just looking. I drafted him.
I know you did. And at the time, I was very happy with that pick because I was excited for Caulfield.
I thought he was going to have a big year.
Yeah. Again, it was Caulfield going down for half the season. I think the 13th round is way too low. You can get him way higher than that. If you get him in the 13th round, that's an absolute steal.
Yeah.
Just looking at his career so far, 4 years in the NHL, very reliable and durable player. I don't believe he's missed a single game in the NHL in his NHL career so far.
I don't think so.
So very reliable, very durable. First 2 years in the NHL, back-to-back 41-point seasons. The next 2 years, same thing, back-to-back 60-plus point seasons. So you can see the progression in 2-year stints. However, a few things about his fantasy value concerns me. Again, one of them, I'm a real big peripheral guy. The peripheral stats are just very underwhelming. A player like Nick Suzuki, like you said, needs to be shooting the puck more than 162 times a season, at least hitting the net 162 times. So that's number one. Number two, the power play sucks in Montreal.
Yeah.
There's no one to truly quarterback the power play like we see across the league now with pretty much every other team.
Very good.
No one that they got on the blue line to quarterback it. Again, you've got some talent in Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield, and Caulfield's your gunner, but he was injured half the year. And that's number three, is that Caulfield was injured half the year. So that dropped, obviously, Suzuki's point production down a little bit. For me, I think Suzuki drops slightly down, probably
Yeah.
to the 7th or 8th round. I think
Yeah, I
that's where
can
you
see
can
it.
get him. Like you said, Montreal over the
Yep.
next 2 years might be a difficult spot to be drafting players.
This is also just a good learning point for me and for our listeners. Look, I'm a guy who's been doing this now for 15 plus seasons, and sometimes you mistake what you and I actually just talked about. You sometimes have to disconnect the hockey world and getting it done on the ice and putting wins in the win column and putting points in your fantasy teams column. And I really love Nick Suzuki, and I'm not a coach in the NHL building my franchise, right, Steele? I'm a fantasy GM trying to build a balanced winning team. And that's where I'm thinking, oh man, Nick Suzuki, what a good player, captain, high IQ, plays the game all the right ways. Those don't rack up any points on your fantasy team. So just remember that sometimes when you get overly high on a player, and I was talking up Nick Suzuki all summer last year as a big step out year. Maybe I was 1 year off, and you can get him at a really, really sneaky round this draft season.
Yeah, I think you can as well. And I think you can for Filip Forsberg, who's last on this list, 67th pick in the 6th round of our fantasy hockey draft. And I'm going to be talking more about Nashville than Filip Forsberg himself, but it's all going to tie together at the end of my vent here. But Nashville's in a very, very interesting position right now. They have 29 draft picks over the next 3 years, 13 of which come in this year's NHL draft. 15
Hashtag David Poy.
Hashtag David Poy, our boy over there, handing the torch down to Barry Trotz as well. But $15.5 million in cap space. Honestly, I think Nashville just had one of those years that you can't really explain what happened. It just didn't pan out the way they went, the way you thought it would. Especially for me, I thought they were a huge dark horse to make the playoffs and go on a little bit of a run. Obviously, didn't pan out, but again, I think it was just everybody had one of those bad down years, except for UC Saros. You look at some of their stats; they were 28th in goals for last season. The year prior to that, they were 16th best in the league. Prior to that, they were 17th best in the league. So they're never one of the best, but they're definitely not one of the worst on a year-to-year basis. Again, I think it was just one of those years that everyone was just having a regression a little bit. But I'm comparing them to the New York Islanders. They're the New York Islanders in the Western Conference. They got a strong D core. They got a great young goalie in UC Saros. Sometimes just struggle to score offensively. So again, you look at some of the roster positions they have. I expect and I believe Nashville will be much better next season in the NHL. And for Forsberg himself, he's the type of guy that has struggled with injuries over the past 6 years. He hasn't played a full season in 6 years yet. He only played 50 games. He had 42 points in 2023. So again, struggled with injuries last year. But if he's fully healthy and he gets those guys going, Matt Duchene and Ryan Johansson, hopefully Roman Josi can have a bounce back year. I'm drafting him in the 5th round. And that might be a little crazy. That might be a little high, but I'm reaching on Filip Forsberg. I absolutely love this player.
He was also 42 points in 50 games before getting hurt effective. So it's just with now how many big time injuries he's had, Steele, the 5th round might be a little bit high, but I don't think he should go much after that. He's 11th overall draft pick. He's only 28 years old. And I think one of the things that also, we talked about the injury to Caulfield affecting Suzuki's value. The other thing I wanted to say about the overall success of the Nashville Predators this year is they ended the season with Matt Duchene, Filip Forsberg, Johansson, and Josi all hurt. So Matt Duchene missed a number of games down the stretch. Forsberg was hurt. Johansson was hurt. Josi got hurt. I think Saros was a little bit banged up at a couple of points too. Don't quote me on that one. But you know what I'm saying? It didn't go right for this team on a number of fronts. And maybe that's, again, one of those things to remember and take a risk on a guy like Johansson. Take a risk on a guy like Filip Forsberg. If you have like a later round pick, especially, I think you can probably get, in most leagues, Steele Forsberg a little bit later, but depends, again, on the format. More astute GMs might be high on him. At the end of the day, too, there's a couple of young players with the Nashville Predators. Keeper dynasty-wise at the end of your draft, Juuso Parssinen, really, really sneaky good young player. Cody Glass had a bit of a step out as well. So those are a couple of young pieces on this team that are also going to get a really good opportunity to eat a lot of top 6 minutes.
Juuso Parssinen was a guy that I picked up quite frequently last year towards the end of the season. Very
some hands.
has some quick hands very efficiently. And yeah, Filip Forsberg is just one of those guys that there's always one player for each of us out there that you always reach on a little bit. And
A
Filip
few,
Forsberg,
maybe.
there's a few out there that we reach on, and Filip Forsberg is one of them for myself. I love drafting Forsberg, just an overall great player out there in the NHL. So we are going to continue a lot of this throughout the offseason, maybe even for tomorrow's episode or starting on Monday's episode, we'll continue the remainder of the 6th round. But thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Make sure you're tuning in Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning Eastern time is when you can find our episodes. And thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your summer bets out there, and we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Peace.